Today, I get my last group meeting, like ever. So I thought I'd give a quick guide to group meetings. Here's the gist. The details are going to vary from lab to lab, but typically once a week, everybody in the lab gets together and you have presentations from one or more people on either a research update, how their research is progressing, or they give a journal club type session where basically they present on a journal article, a research article that they've read, so not their work, but someone else's. It's typically a rotating schedule, so depending on how big your lab is, you might have to present more often or less frequently. Some labs will do it where one week you have someone do research and some week you have the next week someone does journal. That's how we did it in my grad school lab. In my lab here, basically we do it so that you have one of each per session. So someone will give a research and then someone will give a journal club. Sometimes you also have like special things, like if someone's practicing for their qualifying exam or something like that, you might have them do that instead of like a research talk or something like this. The sessions also typically start with some sort of like lab business. So if there's things about equipment that people need to know, maybe someone has suggestions for something, anything that everybody in the lab needs to know about or needs to be there to discuss. So you have that lab business and then you get underway with the real cool science and stuff. So typically you get to choose, if you're doing a journal club type, it's your week for journal club, you typically get to choose a journal article to present. In my grad school, we had it so that you presented one article in depth. Here we have it so that you basically are assigned a number of different journals that you're supposed to keep an eye on, and then you give an overview of some of the articles that you think might be relevant to both yourself as well as to other people in the lab, and then you choose one or two to go a little more detail, but not as in detail as like a whole hour like we would do in my grad school. This journal club is a really great way to learn about what work is going on elsewhere and also be able to discuss these articles in depth with your lab mates who often have a different perspective on things, especially if you're in a lab like mine, which is like a chemical biology and biochemistry lab. So there's people with a wide variety of backgrounds, and I get to learn about things about chemistry that I didn't know, it's a lot of fun hearing different people discuss things and have different ideas. And this is also really, really helpful for when it's your research talk. And so when you give this research talk, basically it's a really great way to practice talking about your research as well as to get suggestions about what you might want to try, some ideas to how to think about or interpret the data that you have. Typically, so this is going to be like less stressful than if you're presenting in front of a big, huge audience of people, but you still want to kind of like make it nicer than you would for just some sort of like subgroup meeting. I'll talk more about those in a second. But because they're going to be, depending on how big your lab is, there might be people who haven't heard what you're doing in a while, and they also are working on a totally different area of research. So if you have like people working on some sort of chemistry of something and that is unrelated to your project, they might not have the background that they need in order to appreciate your project and your work. So you typically start with some sort of like broader background and then go into the progress that you've made. And so make sure that you don't just dive right into the detail on your stuff, and make sure that you aren't using like abbreviations and things that you use in your notes that you then forgot to explain to other people, because that's happened to me before, and that happens to people a lot when you have like images, figures with like your shorthand notation and like, oh wait, people don't know what that is. But giving these presentations is a great way to practice, as well as to kind of make you work on condensing your work down and getting to the gist and analyzing it and making figures and doing all of this stuff to prepare. This is going to help you later on then when you have these slides that you can then pull out. So that's really, really helpful. What's also really, really helpful is that we, at least in this lab here, we have like subgroup meetings. So basically there's about half of our lab works on RNA and ribosomes, and about half works on chromatin and histone modifications and things like this. So we have a chromatin subgroup, and then we have an RNA subgroup. And basically, every other week, we have these subgroup meetings where those ones of us that are working on a similar topic meet together. And this is a lot less stress environment than giving the group meeting, because here, basically, it's more like really work in progress. So what have you done in the last 2 weeks? Not what have you done in the last couple months since you last had to give the research presentation. And here it's a lot more like troubleshooting ideas and really discussing like in detail your experiments at a level that isn't the level that the broader, bigger picture level that you're using when you're doing your group meeting presentation. So the group meeting presentation is typically more like an actual presentation like you would go give to a wider audience, except that you can anticipate that your audience has a little bit more background and you can go a little more in detail into your work. But in the subgroup meetings here, it's really kind of like the conversations that we have with our like the colleague we sit next to, or who's on the bench next to us, or something like that. Those kinds of discussions that we're having all the time. But in this case, we have more people come together, and we have our boss there. We have our PI there, our principal investigator. So it's really great having a bunch of different people being able to weigh in and really help you figure out what's going on in your experiments and what to try. So I really am a fan of those subgroup meetings. And so then again, everybody presents in those, and so you have to really keep on track with your research and keeping your notes and all of this good stuff, making figures along the way, all of this stuff. And so the subgroup meetings are really helpful for that as well. Then, in addition to subgroups, which are like smaller than the group meetings, there's also sometimes like supergroups. So basically, people from different labs that are researching a similar topic. So there's like a cryo-EM supergroup here, where different labs that do cryo-EM, they meet, and then like people rotate through who presents. For a while, we had like a translation supergroup and things like this. In my old institution, so in grad school, we had like in-house meetings. We had like James in-house, where some of the different labs, basically everybody had to present once a year. And that's like a broader audience. It's like people from multiple labs and not just your own lab. So there's subgroup, which is a subset of people in your lab. There's group, which is everybody in your lab. Then there's like supergroup, or like in-house and things like this, which are people from different labs. And all of these are really great ways in which you can practice presenting your research, as well as keep on track and keep updating your notes and your figures and all of this stuff. Your slides, have those handy to whip out whenever you need them. And so that's all the research stuff. And then the group meetings, you also get that fun journal club aspect, where you get to learn about things that are happening in the world of science. We also have like a Slack channel where those papers journals that you're assigned to, you keep an eye on them, and if something comes up that's relevant to other people in the lab, we can stick it in the Slack channel for people to see. And so, so that's the basics of group meetings. So I normally love group meetings. Sometimes though, when it's like comes at an inconvenient time, like science waits for no group meeting. And so sometimes your experiment just really wants you to do something, but it's like, it's group meeting time. But I really like group meeting because it's really fun talking science and geeking out with people. And it's a little nerve-wracking when it's your turn to present, but then it's really nice once it's over. And it is often, or almost always, really, really helpful. And so sometimes it might be more stressful if you've had a hard time with your research lately, but really it's just, as long as you're in a nice lab, so choosing a good lab is really important. And so I love my lab here, and everybody's just really supportive. And so we know that we're all here to train, and we're all learning together, and really being able to learn from one another is super duper valuable. So that's the gist of group meetings, and enjoy your group meetings. I'm going to miss mine, but I'm excited to go become a visiting professor at St. Mary's. And so hopefully one day I'll have my own little lab, and we might not have enough people for group meetings, but we'll sure have great discussions, and I'll make sure that they read a lot of journal articles.